The year is 1898. Imagine a world where a message from the White House to the commander of the Pacific Fleet in Manila Bay takes nearly 40 days to arrive. In an era of burgeoning industrial might and global ambition, this was the brutal reality of the American Empire. The Spanish-American War, a quick, defining victory, had left the United States with vast, scattered territorial prizes. Puerto Rico, Guam, and the jewel of the Pacific, the Philippines. But victory came with a silent, insurmountable handicap: the tyranny of distance. America's new dominion was literally cut off. Any command, any vital piece of intelligence, any market report had to travel across the vast North American continent by telegraph, then be entrusted to a slow, unreliable steamer crossing the deepest ocean on Earth. It was a crippling vulnerability, a logistical nightmare that mocked the new superpower's claim to global dominance. In the smoke-filled, mahogany-paneled back rooms of Washington, D.C., a small, determined circle of men, engineers, admirals, and financiers, knew the true prize wasn't the land, but the speed of information. They understood that to truly hold the Pacific, to command its trade and its waters, America needed to do the impossible: lay a copper wire across 7,000 miles of uncharted abyss. Their challenge was more than just a feat of engineering. It was a battle against nature, a political high-stakes gamble, and a race against the clock. The British Empire already spanned the globe with its all-red line of cables. America, late to the game, had to make a singular, gargantuan leap. This is the true story of how a single, thin strand of insulated copper cable, laid across the deepest parts of the Pacific Ocean, became the literal nerve center of the American century, and the astonishing cost, in both blood and fortune, to make that whisper of the wire a reality. Chapter 1: The Weight of the Deep. The salt spray was a fine, stinging mist across the deck of the SS Silvertown as it steamed out of San Francisco Bay in late December 1902. But for George Owen Squire, the brilliant, driven military scientist whose mind was the true engine of this whole enterprise, the sting was from the cold dread in his stomach. He wasn't aboard the Silvertown. He was back in Washington, pacing the War Department offices. But his spirit was on that cable ship, riding the swells and plunging into the unknown. Squire, an Army Signal Corps major, was not a businessman or a sailor, but a revolutionary. His doctoral dissertation on polarized light was groundbreaking, but his obsession now was with electromagnetic communication. He saw cables not just as wires, but as the physical manifestation of American destiny. The $2.5 million contract for the first leg, San Francisco to Honolulu, had been awarded to the Commercial Pacific Cable Company, CPCC, a formidable syndicate backed by industry titans like J.P. Morgan and John W. McKay, the Silver King of the. Chapter 2: Midway's Desolate Bridge. The successful landing of the cable in Honolulu in early January 1903 was met with fanfare. Hawaii, recently annexed, was now tied to the mainland not just by law, but by an instantaneous copper thread. The first commercial message sent back to San Francisco was a simple, triumphant aloha. But the real engineering and logistical nightmare lay in the middle segment, Honolulu to Midway Atoll. This stretch was 1,300 miles of deep ocean leading to one of the most remote, desolate, and ecologically bizarre islands in the Pacific, a place that, until the cable project, was known only to passing whalers and millions of seabirds. The problem of the pinpoint, Midway Atoll, was chosen out of necessity. An undersea cable can only transmit a clear, usable signal for about 2,000 nautical miles before the electrical current degrades into static. To reach Manila, a relay station was essential. Midway, being roughly halfway, was the ideal and only geological candidate. The atoll itself was a tiny ring of coral and sand, barely rising above the high tide mark. It was truly uninhabited, claimed by the U.S. Navy in 1867, but essentially abandoned. The Commercial Pacific Cable Company, CPCC, had to build an entire civilization from scratch to house the cable repeater station and the small, highly trained crew who would operate it. In 1902, before the Silvertown arrived, the supply steamer SS Necker landed a contingent of tough-minded construction men and technicians, along with a mountain of materials: prefabricated wooden barracks, boilers, generators, fresh water condensers, for there was no potable water, and enough canned goods to last a year. Their first enemy wasn't the ocean, but the Lyson albatross, or Goonie birds. If you haven't been dive-bombed by a dozen indignant Goonies while trying to lay a foundation, wrote one exasperated CPCC foreman, you haven't truly earned your pay. The birds, utterly fearless of man, numbered in the millions. They covered every square foot of land, built nests in the future engine rooms, and saw the arriving laborers and machinery as a massive, noisy inconvenience. Landing the heavy machinery, the steam boilers, the massive iron cable tanks, and the delicate telegraph instruments, through the treacherous coral reefs and across the bird-infested sand dunes was a daily, bruising battle. The machinery of instantaneity. The heart of the midway station was the repeater room. The cable, once hauled ashore and spliced, ran into this climate-controlled space. Here, the faint electrical whispers arriving from Honolulu would be received, boosted, and sent onward toward Guam. The key instrument was the siphon recorder, a marvel developed by Lord Kelvin. It was a hypersensitive galvanometer, a coil of wire, suspended in a strong magnetic field, swung gently with the minute electrical impulse from the cable. Attached to the coil was a microscopic glass siphon dipped in ink. The vibrate. Bridge at Night, Chapter 3, The Abyss and the Philippine Cipher. The leg from Guam to Manila was the culmination of America's ambition and the ultimate test of its technological prowess. At over 1,600 nautical miles, this stretch spanned the edge of the Mariana Trench, the deepest part of the global ocean floor. The cable ship, having successfully navigated the challenges of Midway, now faced the unknown topography of the Philippine Sea, a place where the seabed was not gently sloping, but violently fractured by volcanic activity and subject to deep-sea landslides. The tyranny of the abyss. Captain Trott and the chief engineers aboard the Silvertown relied on detailed bathymetric surveys, mostly provided by the U.S. Navy. The data showed their route would pass over depths averaging 3 miles, surpassing any previous cable-laying effort in history. This depth brought 2 critical dangers. Crushing pressure. At this depth, the pressure was over 8,000 pounds per square inch. While the gutta-percha insulation was robust, the smallest manufacturing flaw or weakness caused by a sudden snag could result in implosion, ruining the section of cable. Unrecoverable break. The cable was designed to have a breaking strain of about 15 tons. However, if the cable snapped in 15,000 feet of water, the weight of the dangling section was often enough to drag the ship's grappling hooks into the mud, making a successful grapnel operation. Finding and hauling up the severed end, a near impossibility. Repairing a cable break in the deep ocean could take months and cost a fortune. The laying process became agonizingly slow. The Silvertown was forced to move at less than 4 knots, about 4.6 miles per hour, its steam engines pushing against the drag of the enormous weight of the cable trailing thousands of feet behind it. Every rotation of the payout wheel was a calculation of tension, ship speed, and water depth, ensuring the cable settled gently into the dark, cold mud of the ocean floor without hanging over a trench or snagging on a volcanic peak. Guam, the uncouth nerve center. While the ship wrestled with the deep, the U.S. Navy was busy securing the cable's nerve center in Guam. The landing site at Sumi Village was initially a dense, swampy jungle. A small contingent of American technicians, along with Chinese and local Chamorro laborers, had to hack out a space for the cable station, which was essentially a fortress of communication. The buildings were rough wooden structures, housing the delicate siphon recorders, powerful generators, and, most importantly, the telegraphists. These operators were the true sentinels of the copper cipher. They worked around the clock, receiving and retransmitting the chatter of the world. They were isolated men, yet they held the pulse of global events in their hands. The very first message received on Guam, even before the full line to Manila was complete, was an urgent, encrypted military telegram regarding troop movements in the Philippines. The CA.